When you picture the Adeptus Astartes, a very specific archetype usually pops into your head, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
You envision this uh, absolute mechanical precision. Like you think of the cold, emotionless discipline of the Imperial fists.
Right, or, the rigid, almost bureaucratic, tactical perfection of the Ultramarine.
Exactly. The expectation is a warrior who basically functions as a living weapon, stripped of all human frailty, meticulously adhering to a strict operational doctrine, and um, calculating warfare with the flawless detachment of a machine.
A perfect instrument of imperial compliance, essentially. I mean, we expect the ultimate protectors of humanity to represent the absolute pinnacle of control.
Right, because they're post-human.
Yeah, exactly. The Astartes are biologically engineered to be post-human, which traditionally implies they have transcended the messy, unpredictable nature of baseline humanity.
They're above all that human chaos.
Completely. The complete subjugation of the individual will to the greater command structure is not just expected, it's considered the foundational bedrock of a Space Marine chapter.
And it's a comforting thought, frankly. I mean, if you have these genetically modified titans guarding the galaxy for you, you desperately want them to have a rule book.
Can you want them following it to the letter?
Right. But then you step into the world of our source material for today's deep dive, and that neat, orderly picture just completely shatters.
It really does. It's a total paradigm shift.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into this fascinating text titled The Untamed Savagery of the Space Wolves. And the core of this text asks a deeply unsettling question for you to
A
consider.
very unsettling question, yeah.
What happens when the Imperium's most elite, devastating warriors look at that holy rulebook, laugh, and basically throw it into a fire in favor of howling, hunting, and drinking?
It forces us to completely reevaluate the Imperium's definition of an effective military asset.
Totally.
I mean, the source text immediately confronts us with this jarring paradox. It describes the Space Wolves explicitly as the Emperor's untamed, savage sons.
Untamed and savage, two words you don't normally associate with disciplined super soldiers.
Exactly. They occupy this terrifying, razor-thin threshold. On one side of the line, they are fiercely loyal apex predators, right? Some of the most effective line breakers and executioners the Imperium possesses.
But on the other side,
On the other side, they are teetering on the absolute edge of becoming the very monstrous beasts they are deployed to hunt.
and exploring that exact threshold is our mission for this deep dive. We're going to tear into this source text to understand the actual mechanisms behind the Space Wolves.
Because it's not just about what they are.
Right, we aren't just looking at the surface level lore, we need to figure out why they function the way they do.
Yeah, the underlying reasons.
We're going to dissect their blatant defiance of standard Astartes doctrine, understand the deeply primal culture that replaces monastic meditation, and examine the terrifying genetic curse that is actively trying to consume them from the inside out.
That's a lot to unpack. But to understand why a fighting force operates with such deliberate savagery, we have to examine the forge that created them first.
The environment?
Yeah, the environment is the blueprint here. The text roots the very biological and psychological identity of the Space Wolves in two inextricably linked factors.
Their homeworld of Fenris and their Primarch, Leman Russ.
Precisely. And the source text doesn't mince words when describing Fenris. It classifies it as a frozen death world.
But, like, standard planetary classifications don't really do justice to what is actually happening on that rock, do they?
Not at all. I mean, when you hear death world, you usually think of hostile fauna or extreme weather. But Fenris is a planet that is actively, geologically trying to murder its inhabitants on a constant loop.
It's not just a bad winter.
No, the mechanics of Fenris are vital to understanding the Space Wolf psyche. Fenris has this highly elliptical orbit, which creates an extreme seasonal cycle known as the Great Year.
Okay, so how extreme are we talking?
Well, during the long winter, the oceans freeze over entirely, creating a temporary, fragile stability. People can actually travel and settle a bit.
But then the planet gets closer to the sun, right?
Yeah, right. When it approaches its sun, the Wolf's Eye, it triggers something called the Time of Fire and Water.
That sounds incredibly ominous.
It is. The gravitational stress causes massive tectonic upheaval. Continents are literally torn apart, swallowed by the boiling oceans, and new land masses are violently thrust up from the core.
Oh, wow. So you imagine trying to build a civilization on, like, an edge A sketch that the universe vigorously shakes every few years.
That's a perfect analogy, actually, yeah.
The native human population is basically forced into a state of perpetual, desperate migration.
Constantly on the move.
Right. They have to constantly sail these treacherous oceans filled with leviathans just to find a piece of land that won't, sink into magma the next day.
And the psychological imprint of that is staggering.
It has to be. You can't cultivate quiet monastic discipline when the ground beneath your feet is a temporary volatile luxury.
Exactly. The environment dictates a psychology of absolute pragmatism and hyperaggression. It's a Darwinian nightmare.
Survival of the absolute fittest.
Literally. The weak do not survive to adulthood, period. So if we look at this from the perspective of the Adeptus Mechanicus, or the High Lords of Terra, drafting recruits from this environment is a deliberate, calculated choice.
You are starting with human stock
Mm-hmm.
that considers a standard Imperial war zone to be like a relatively mild vacation compared to a Tuesday on Fenris.
Yeah, combat on a hive world is probably relaxing for them.
But, that choice seems entirely counterintuitive if the goal is to build a highly disciplined military force.
It does seem backwards, yeah.
If you want a controlled, predictable weapon, you don't build it out of the most chaotic, unrefined material you can find. It brings up a massive question regarding Imperial tolerance.
Which is,
Why does an Imperium obsessed with dogmatic order tolerate a standing army built from such a volatile foundation?
well, because the Imperium, despite all its dogma, is ultimately driven by ruthless pragmatism.
The ends justify the means.
Always. The galaxy is filled with horrors that standard, predictable order simply cannot break. The Astartes are meant to be the Emperor's scalpel, but the Space Wolves are his battle axe.
I love that distinction.
Yeah, when the Imperium needs a target completely eradicated, not just defeated, but utterly annihilated to send a message they unleash the wolves, the volatility isn't a bug in the system.
It's the primary feature.
Exactly. They're weaponizing the trauma of the environment.
Weaponizing the trauma and weaponizing the genetic legacy of their Primarch, right?
Yes, Leman Russ. Leman Russ is not merely a historical general to the Space Wolves. He is the literal and symbolic embodiment of Fenris itself.
So they see him as the planet personified.
According to the text, the identity of the chapter is inextricably linked to Russ. He codified their tribal warfare into a galactic military doctrine.
He was the Alpha Wolf.
He was the Alpha Wolf who demonstrated that unbridled savagery, when pointed in the right direction, is an insurmountable tactical advantage.
Okay, so that dual foundation, the tectonic nightmare of Fenris and the savage philosophy of Russ, that explains why these Astartes survive.
That's their bedrock.
Right. But what I find far more compelling in the source material is the mechanism of how they actually choose to live.
Your day-to-day culture.
Yeah. Because when you look at their culture, it is a complete and total inversion of everything we expect from galactic super soldiers.
The text details their outright rejection of the ascetic contemplative life that defines almost every other Space Marine chapter.
There is no silent prayer in a sterile cell.
None. There is no fasting or suppression of the ego.
It's the total opposite. The source describes a culture built entirely around personal glory, boastful sagas, massive feasts, and consuming vast quantities of Amjad.
Which is their specific, highly potent version of alcohol.
Yeah, and to an outside observer, or to an inquisitor, it looks like a glorified, hyper-violent mead hall, like a frat house in space.
It absolutely looks that way. But there is a biological and psychological necessity to this behavior that the text really leans into.
Okay, unpack that for us. Why is it a necessity?
We have to consider the physiological reality of a Space Marine. They are heavily psycho-indoctrinated. Their bodies are flooded with combat stimulants and heightened sensory input.
Right, they're basically hyper-aware at all times.
Exactly. For a standard Astartes, strict discipline, meditation, and hypnotherapy are absolutely required to manage that massive cognitive load and prevent them from going insane.
But the Space Wolves are different.
Very different. Their genetic makeup, which we will discuss in detail later, is notoriously resistant to standard hypnotherapy.
Oh, wow. So they literally can't be brainwashed into compliance the way standard Astartes can.
Precisely. The Canis Helix makes their minds too feral, too resistant to standard psychoconditioning. Therefore, they have to replace that artificial conditioning with an organic grounding mechanism.
A cultural grounding mechanism.
Yes. When a warrior's origin is steeped in the frozen death of Fenris, and their daily life is endless galactic warfare, feasting and storytelling are not hobbies.
They are psychological anchors.
Exactly. The oral tradition takes the place of the hypnocask.
So instead of a machine telling them how to think, they have their brothers telling them stories.
Yes. The text specifically refers to this dynamic as the saga and the pack.
The saga and the pack.
By sharing stories of their kills, by eating roasted meat, and by drinking MJade, which, by the way, is a whole fascinating thing on its own.
Yeah, let's talk about the MJ. It's not just strong beer, is it?
No, it's brewed with deadly plant toxins, specifically engineered to temporarily bypass their post-human metabolism just so they can actually feel intoxicated.
That is insane.
Yeah.
You have to poison themselves just to get a buzz.
Because their biology filters out normal toxins instantly. So by doing all this, they are forcing themselves to experience something physical and visceral that isn't just war. It grounds their altered physiology to a deeply human communal experience.
Okay, that makes biological sense. But from a purely military standpoint, I really have to challenge this structure.
Go for it.
Unit cohesion is the absolute foundation of any effective fighting force, right?
Undeniably.
So if every single warrior in a Space Wolf pack is deeply obsessed with their own personal saga, with being the loudest voice in the room, and basically out-killing the Astartes next to them, just to earn a better story at the feast.
You're wondering how that doesn't fall apart.
Yeah. How does this not devolve into completely undisciplined arrogance? How does a Wolf Lord issue a complex tactical command when half his squad is trying to solo a Carnifex just for the bragging rights?
It's a very fair question, and it's a critical vulnerability, but it is mitigated by how they actually define the concept of the pack.
How so?
The Space Wolves have basically transposed the dynamics of apex predators into a military hierarchy. They completely reject top-down bureaucratic discipline.
Okay.
An Ultramarine follows an order because it is tactically sound and mandated by the chain of command, right?
Right, because the manual says so.
Exactly. But a Space Wolf follows an order because it comes from their alpha, and because the survival of the brother fighting on their flank is paramount to the survival of the pack itself.
Ah, so the loyalty is horizontal, built on blood, rather than vertical, built on bureaucracy.
That is a great way to put it, yes. An organic, deeply emotional loyalty is far harder to break in the heat of combat than a theoretical adherence to a manual.
Because you care about the guy next to you.
They don't fight for abstract concepts of imperial truth. They fight for the warrior right next to them. If one wolf is attempting to solo a massive enemy for glory, the pack doesn't just abandon him for breaking formation.
They don't report him to a commissar.
No, they charge in with him, because that is how a pack hunts. It turns what should be a tactical breakdown into an overwhelming, localized concentration of force.
Okay, I see how that works on a squad level, but scaling that up creates a massive logistical headache.
Oh, a massive one.
Because it is one thing for a pack of 10 Astartes to operate on instinct and brotherhood. It is another thing entirely to run a galaxy-spanning war effort.
Right, the macro scale.
You can't coordinate orbital bombardment, supply chains, and multi-theater planetary invasions based solely on good vibes and the Alpha's intuition.
You really can't.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the structural defiance of the Space Wolves, a topic the source text highlights as one of their most controversial traits.
They tear up the rulebook.
They completely ignore the defining military framework of the Imperium.
We are talking about the Codex Astartes.
Yes. The text explicitly points out that the Codex Astartes is revered as the holy tome of Space Marine organization.
Written by a literal demigod.
Exactly. Written by Roboute Guilliman, a Primarch. The goal was to standardize the Adeptus Astartes after the Horus Heresy. It broke the massive, potentially rebellious legions into smaller, predictable chapters of 1,000 men.
Strictly organized, right?
Very strict. Scout, reserve, battle, and veteran companies. 10 companies of 100 men each.
Let's frame how deeply offensive ignoring this is within the context of the Imperium for a second.
It's hard to overstate.
The Imperium is a regime defined by suffocating, violent dogma. Wars are fought, entire planets are burned, over minor deviations in administrative procedure or worship.
Millions die over paperwork errors.
Right. The Codex Astartes isn't just a suggestion. It is the foundational blueprint for how the Emperor's finest are supposed to operate. And the Space Wolves look at this sacred, universally mandated text and effectively use it as kindling.
Pretty much. They utilize what they call great companies instead.
Which are what, exactly?
Well, instead of the Codex mandated 10 companies with very specific tactical roles, the Space Wolves operate multiple great companies, and each one functions almost as an independent, feudal warband.
So they don't share a standardized structure at all.
None at all. The size and composition of a great company are entirely dependent on the charisma, the martial prowess, and the specific strategic preferences of the Wolf Lord who commands it.
That is wild. So
Yeah.
one Wolf Lord might prefer mass drop pod assaults, so his great company is just packed with jump packs and close combat specialists.
Exactly. While another might prefer heavy armor and artillery, so he just built his company around that. There is zero standardization across the chapter.
And this has to be a logistical nightmare for the Departamento Munitorum, right? The imperial bureaucracy trying to supply them.
Oh, it drives him crazy. How do you supply an army that changes its loadout based on the personality of its commander? But beyond logistics, it also carries a massive political risk.
Because it looks like rebellion.
The Inquisition and the High Lords of Terra view any deviation from standard doctrine as potential heresy.
So why did they get away with it? How does a single chapter blatantly refuse the rules of the entire galactic military apparatus and not get instantly purged?
It basically comes down to a deeply uncomfortable pragmatism on the part of the Imperium, combined with the historical weight of the Space Wolves.
They have seniority.
They do. Their first founding chapter. They were built by the Emperor himself. Purging them would require deploying multiple other Astartes chapters, risking a massive civil war that the Imperium simply cannot afford.
It would be a bloodbath.
And furthermore, the High Lords know that when a Tyranid hive fleet or a massive Orc-Wa is bearing down on a critical sector, the Codex Astartes only goes so far.
Rules don't stop a million orcs.
Right. Sometimes you don't need a perfectly organized battle line. You need a pack of rabid executioners who will tear the throat out of the enemy command structure regardless of casualties.
So the Imperium tolerates their structural heresy because their savage methodology produces undisputed results.
Exactly. The bureaucrats in Terra might despise them, but they know they need them.
However, throwing out the Codex creates a massive internal problem for the Space Wolves themselves.
How to train new recruits.
Yes, the Codex doesn't just dictate how to deploy an army, it dictates how to build a Space Marine. It gives a clear, step-by-step progression.
Right, you start in the scout company.
Learning stealth and reconnaissance. Then you move to the reserve companies to learn heavy weapons and assault tactics. And finally, after all that testing, you earn your place in a battle company.
A very logical progression.
But if the Space Wolves reject that blueprint, how do they temper their raw recruits? How do they train them?
They replace the structured pedagogical progression of the Codex with an incredibly brutal psychological tempering process that the text calls the Path of the Wolf.
The Path of the Wolf.
And it is guided, as the source notes, by the perspective of a Wolf Lord's testimony.
This is the journey from Bloodclaw to Wolfguard.
Yes, and this is where the biological and psychological aspects of the Space Wolves truly collide.
Walk us through it. What happens to a recruit?
Well, when a Fenrisian youth survives the genetic ascension process, they aren't given a sniper rifle and told to sit quietly on a ridge and observe the enemy.
No scout duty for them.
No, they are pushed directly to the absolute front lines as a Bloodclaw.
Bloodclaw. The terminology is just perfect.
It really is. Bloodclaws are the hot-headed youths of the chapter. But it is vital to understand that their recklessness is not just youthful arrogance, it is deeply physiological.
It's in their blood.
Literally. When they receive the Canis Helix, their senses are hyper-amplified. They can smell the adrenaline of the enemy from miles away. They can hear heartbeats.
That sounds overwhelming.
It is an overwhelming sensory overload of predatory instinct. They literally cannot be trusted with heavy weapons or stealth reconnaissance because their biology is screaming at them to close the distance and kill with their bare hands.
That is a staggering contrast to standard military doctrine. I mean, a normal army protects its recruits, right?
You gradually acclimatize them to combat so they don't die on their first deployment.
Exactly. But the Space Wolves take their most volatile, least experienced, most aggressive assets, strap chainswords to their arms, and point them at the thickest part of the enemy line.
It sounds insane on paper.
The strategy seems to be, like, let the beast off the leash and see if it can survive its own aggression.
It is a literal trial by fire, and this is where the mechanism of tempering actually occurs.
How so?
A Bloodclaw who survives their first few decades of warfare doesn't just gain tactical experience. Their brain, physically and psychologically, begins to adapt to the sensory overload of the Canis Helix.
The biology settles down.
Yes, the beast inside them begins to settle, and they witness their packmates dying because of stupid, reckless charges.
The trauma teaches them.
The trauma of those losses burns away the desire for individual glory.
And that transition moves them into the next phase. While the source text focuses on the endpoints of the youth and the veteran, anyone familiar with the chapter's lore knows the crucial middle ground here.
The Grey Hunters.
The Grey Hunters. They form the tactical core of the great companies.
They are the survivors. They have felt the sting of losing brothers, and their predatory instincts have shifted.
Shifted from what?
From a blinding need to kill into a calculating need to hunt efficiently. They use bolters, they hold the line, and they operate with a cynical, grizzled pragmatism.
They realize the pack's survival is more important than their own personal saga.
Exactly. Which brings us to the endpoint of the Path of the Wolf mentioned in the text.
The Wolf Guard.
Yes, to become a wolf guard is to have entirely mastered the inner beast. These are the grizzled veterans, the bodyguards of the Wolf Lord, and the leaders of the packs.
They've seen it all.
They are weighed down by centuries of warfare and the memory of every blood claw they've ever seen torn apart.
So the Path of the Wolf is basically a filtering system.
That's all it is. You don't take an exam to get promoted. You simply survive long enough for war to carve away your recklessness, leaving only a hardened anchor.
I mean, I love the analogy of aging a highly volatile spirit in an oak barrel. You start with something raw, aggressive, and burning a blood claw.
And if you let it sit, survive, and absorb the environment,
it becomes a potent, complex, mastered vintage, a wolf guard.
It is a brutally effective way to forge a leader, but it forces us to confront a terrifying statistical reality.
The failure rate.
Exactly. If your entire training methodology is based on letting violently aggressive, genetically modified teenagers loose to see if they can master their rage.
A significant percentage of them are going to fail.
They are, and not fail as in, die in combat, but fail to master the biology surging through their veins.
And that failure is the catalyst for the darkest, most closely guarded secret within the chapter.
The tone of the text really pivots here.
It does. It shifts from a study of cultural defiance into something resembling outright biological horror. We have to examine the true nature of the Canis Helix.
The Curse of the Wolfen.
The source text makes it very clear that while other chapters might suffer from minor gene seed flaws like, a missing organ here, abnormal skin pigmentation there, the Space Wolves mutation is fundamentally structural and utterly catastrophic.
The Canis Helix is not a stable genetic sequence. It is a highly volatile, predatory retrovirus that constantly fights a war against the host's own DNA.
That sounds agonizing.
It is. During the initiation process, known as the test of Morkai, the aspirant drinks from the cup of Wolfen, ingesting the raw helix.
And their body reacts immediately, right?
Oh, instantly. Their body attempts to reject it. They undergo agonizing physical mutations. Their bones shift. Their fangs elongate. Their hair thickens.
And they aren't kept in a hospital ward for this.
No. They are cast out into the freezing wilderness of Fenris, unarmed and entirely alone.
And their primary enemy out there isn't the cold or the local apex predators. It is their own blood.
Exactly. They have to mentally dominate the genetic sequence that is trying to rewrite their brain.
What happens if they fail?
If they surrender to the predatory instincts simply to survive the cold, they don't just wash out. They undergo a permanent, terminal physiological transformation.
They become Wolfen.
Yes. Feral, hunched, half-man, half-wolf monstrosities driven by pure, unthinking violence. They lose all capacity for speech, reason, or strategy.
That is horrific enough during the initiation phase. But the truly terrifying aspect is that the Canis Helix is never fully dormant, is it?
No, never. A space wolf who has served for 300 years, a seasoned gray hunter, or even a wolf guard, can still succumb to the curse if they are pushed too far in combat.
It is a dormant malignancy.
Yeah.
Extreme trauma, prolonged isolation, or simply giving in too deeply to the rage of close-quarters combat can trigger the transformation at any moment in a space wolf's life.
At any moment.
Just imagine the sheer psychological weight of that. You are deployed to fight the worst horrors in the galaxy. Your entire combat doctrine requires you to fight with the ferocity of a wild animal.
You howl, you rip, you tear into the enemy.
But if you let go of that razor-thin thread of control, if you enjoy the butchery a fraction too much, your own genetics will betray you.
You devolve into a mindless beast.
And you will turn on the brother standing right next to you. It's like installing a massive, hypercharged engine in a race car, but knowing the brakes are made of glass.
That's exactly it. It highlights a staggering cognitive dissonance at the heart of the chapter. The text explicitly points out this duality, calling the Wolfen simultaneously the chapter's deepest shame and their greatest weapon.
Wait, how can they possibly utilize them as a weapon? They're mindless monsters.
Out of sheer desperate necessity. In times of catastrophic conflict, the space wolves have been known to actually unleash packs of wolfen into the enemy lines.
Really? They just point them and let them go.
Yeah. The sheer kinetic destruction a wolfen can cause is matched only by dreadnoughts or light armor. They are an avalanche of muscle, claw, and rage.
But that has to be a last resort.
Oh, it's a desperate gamble. A tacit admission that the chapter is willing to unleash its own damnation just to win the battle.
The source text mentions the wolf priests in this context. Their duty is to monitor the spiritual and genetic purity of the chapter.
And we really have to examine the psychological toll this takes on a culture built entirely around the pack.
Right, because the wolf priests are not just spiritual guys or medics.
They are wardens
Yeah.
and executioners.
Think about the burden they carry. They have to watch their brothers' warriors. They have fought alongside for centuries, men whose sagas they have memorized begin to slip.
They see the signs. They see the eyes go yellow, the speech slurring into growls.
Armor discarded because it feels too restrictive.
And when the curse takes over completely, the wolf priest must be the one to hunt down and cage or kill their own brother.
It transforms every single battle into an existential tightrope walk. They are defined by their savagery, yet their savagery is the very disease that will kill them.
It is an impossible way to exist.
And this profound, inescapable tragedy scales up to form the ultimate thesis of our source material. The text argues that the space wolves are not just an outlier within the Imperium.
No, it goes much further than that.
It claims they are a direct microcosm of the Imperium's ultimate failure.
The final section of the text posits that the space wolves embody the Imperium's failure to tame its own savage heart.
That is a massive systemic indictment of the Emperor's entire grand design.
It really is. I mean, the Emperor sought to conquer the galaxy through cold, secular rationalism. He created the Primarchs and the Astartes to be the perfect, logical instruments of that rational compliance.
But the text shatters that illusion of perfect, unified super soldiers. It deliberately points to the Space Wolves' ancient, blood-soaked rivalries with other loyalist factions.
Specifically highlighting their feud with the Thousand Sons and their deep-seated animosity toward the Dark Angels.
These feuds are the ultimate proof that the post-human Astartes are still fundamentally driven by primitive, destructive human emotions.
Let's look at the mechanism of the rivalry with the Thousand Sons, the Legion of Magnus the Red. It wasn't just a simple disagreement over tactics.
Is a fundamental ideological hatred.
Yes, the Thousand Sons were scholars, sorcerers who wielded the power of the warp with meticulous study and, frankly, a lot of hubris.
And the Space Wolves absolutely despised them for it. Leman Russ viewed Magnus's sorcery as dishonorable, dangerous witchcraft.
But there is a massive hypocrisy there, isn't there?
Oh, a huge one. The Space Wolves utilize rune priests, who essentially draw upon the exact same psychically reactive dimension, the warp, to call down lightning and storms on the battlefield.
Exactly. The Space Wolves justify their own psychic powers by claiming their rune priests drew magic organically from the spirit of Fenris rather than the corrupting depths of the warp.
Which is just a culturally ingrained bias.
It's hypocritical. And this petty hatred didn't just stay verbal. It culminated in the burning of Prospero, where the Space Wolves were unleashed to absolutely annihilate the Thousand Sons' homeworld.
The Emperor's perfect super soldiers enthusiastically butchering each other because of ideological zealotry and rigid cultural pride.
And the feud with the Dark Angels is equally revealing about their flaws.
Tell us about that one.
Well, the Dark Angels represent the ultimate knightly order, secretive, deeply structured, and obsessed with martial honor. Their Primarch, Lionel Johnson, and Leman Russ constantly clashed over military protocol and pride.
Total personality clash.
Exactly. During a compliance action, Russ was engaged in personal combat with a rebel leader. The Lion, seeing a tactical opening, just stepped in and struck the killing blow himself.
He stole Russ's kill.
He did. And Russ, operating on pride and pack mentality, viewed this as an unforgivable slight. It escalated into a massive brawl between the two demigods.
Over a stolen kill. And the staggering part is that 10,000 years later, whenever the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels operate in the same theater, they still force chosen champions from both sides to fight a ritualistic honor duel before they will deploy together.
They are holding a grudge over a stolen kill from 10 millennia ago while the entire galaxy burns around them.
It's absurd.
But it proves the text's assertion. Beneath the ceramite armor, the advanced hypnotherapy, and the holy rhetoric, the Astartes are not above petty hatreds and bloody grudges.
The Imperium projects this image of divine, unified order, guided by the Codex Astartes.
But the reality is a deeply fractured collection of tribal warbands teetering on the edge of madness, consumed by the very beast they claim to control.
The source text leaves us with a truly chilling conclusion. It suggests that the Space Wolves are one of the Imperium's most devastatingly effective weapons because they are so unpredictable.
Not in spite of it, because of it.
Right. It argues that in a galaxy teeming with literal demons from the warp, endlessly hungry Tyranid swarms, and brutal orc waws, polite civilization and mechanical precision are just not enough.
The best defense against the horrors of the galaxy might just be the untamed savagery of warriors who have long since forgotten how to be civilized.
If we synthesize all the mechanisms we've explored today,
Let's run through them.
the tectonic meat grinder of Fenris, the psychological anchors of the Emdade and the sagas, the political defiance of shredding the Codex Astartes, the brutal filtering of the path of the wolves, and the ever-present terrifying specter of the Canid Helix.
We see a clear, undeniable pattern. None of these elements are just quirky cultural eccentricities.
They are all desperate, necessary coping mechanisms.
They are coping with the reality that they are fundamentally unstable.
Yes. They feast and roar their sagas, because if they sit in the quiet contemplation mandated by standard Astartes doctrine, the beast inside their DNA might actually wake up.
They reject the rigid structure of the Codex because formatting rules and bureaucratic chains of command cannot govern a ticking genetic time bomb.
They embrace their savagery because the universe they inhabit demands absolute ruthlessness just to survive another day.
It really strips away all the heroic mythology of the Space Marine.
We have journeyed through the absolute frozen nightmare of Fenrisian ecology, sat at the roaring, chemically fueled feasting tables of the great companies, traced the grueling biological transition from a sensory-overloaded Bloodclaw to a cynical, hardened Wolfguard.
And stared directly into the tragic, monstrous reality of the Wolfen Curse.
We've seen exactly how the Imperium's greatest, most deadly protectors are simultaneously its most untamed, volatile threat.
They are a paradox that the Imperium cannot resolve, only aim and unleash. And this leaves us with a profound, lingering question to consider.
Lay it on us.
The Imperium justifies all of its atrocities, its dogma, and its cruelty under the guise of protecting human civilization. But if the ultimate defense of that civilization relies entirely on stripping away every civilized impulse, unleashing genetic monsters, and embracing untamed, feral savagery.
What exactly is humanity fighting to protect?
Exactly. If the Space Wolves represent the ultimate endgame of human survival mechanics, perhaps the Imperium isn't actually trying to save civilization at all.
Perhaps it is just desperately trying to ensure that humanity remains the most terrifying, ruthless beast left alive in the dark. That is a staggering implication to leave us with. If the only way to beat the monsters is to outmonster them, you've already lost what you were trying to save. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the primal heart of the Adeptus Astartes. Keep questioning the dogmas and narratives you encounter, and remember that sometimes the only difference between the righteous protector and the howling beast is the color of their armor.